All right, thanks for joining us once again, our weekly hockey conversation that is called Wooden Sticks, recording, as always, from the Aquarius Home Services studio. My name is Kevin Gorg, and just the day after game number 1 of 82 for the Minnesota Wild, got home late last night from St. Louis. We're recording on a Friday morning. All is well in the state of hockey, as they say. Really fun to be a part of it last night. Great atmosphere at Enterprise Arena down St. Louis way. The crowd was rocking, and I mean rocking early. It was super loud. We did the pregame show kind of up in the third level there, and couldn't hear our producer or director. It was so loud. And it slowly settled into a regular season game. It wasn't like, as the game went on, it felt like a playoff game. But early on, it was pretty electric in there. And then the Wild did their job and took the crowd out of the game and played a smart game defensively, got a great game from their goaltender, Philip Gustafsson. And, you know, again, it's one of 82. I get that. But I think we all learned last year with the injuries the Wild went through in game number 82, where they actually needed Joel Eriksson to score a goal in the closing seconds to get into the playoffs after having the best record in the league through the Christmas break. So it still matters, especially when you're playing a division opponent, a team that was a playoff team last year that likely, I think the Blues will be back in the playoff conversation this year. And I think the 5-0's a little bit deceptive. The Blues outshot the Wild, and for the first half of the game, clearly, especially in the second period, had the better chances. I mean, you never apologize for having the better goalie, and last night Gustafsson was better than Binnington, and it wasn't close. And that's part of the game. It's no different than having the better quarterback in football or the better pitcher in baseball. It's a fairly important position. But you saw a lot of really good positive things, and it'll be fun to break that down today. My guest today is Brandon Mileski from KFAN. He's a dear friend. He's just an unbelievably great human being. Every day from noon to 3, it's him and the Common Man on the Fan, and very unique show, very fun show. But, you know, 10-B, Brandon Mileski is kind of the hockey guy at the station. And so you've heard him on Wild Broadcast, the call-in show, the pregame show sometimes, Wild Weekly. He's involved in a lot of different areas on the Wild side of the broadcast on the Fan. So it's going to be great to tap into his knowledge, to get his backstory. Minnesota guy, grew up playing hockey here in the state. And I think he has I love listening to him on the radio. He has a really unique way of digesting Wild games. And, you know, he's got a coaching background. He sees the game at a very high level. And so I'm really curious to hear some of his thoughts on not only the game last night, but more importantly, the season ahead, where this team is at. Is there a Stanley Cup run in our future? I think he'll have a lot of strong opinions, and I think he's a very sharp and solid hockey mind in this game. So that'll be a lot of fun in the conversation today. And, just kind of dive into the regular season that's ahead. I think there are some great storylines that are starting to unfold. I think opening week has gone very well. I think the NHL is in a good place right now. You know, I think when you look at the Big Four, starting with the NFL, working your way down through the NBA, Major League Baseball, and of course the National Hockey League, and I'm biased, but if I take a step back and look at where the game is at right now, and knowing that the salary cap continues to go up and the league is flourishing, in different markets are popping up. You know, we've got Utah right now that probably is at the top of that list. The game is in a good place. And as I watched some of the coverage this week and looked at SportsCenter, which is kind of a national platform to kind of see where the needle is kind of moving in the world of sports. The NFL is always going to be king. That's never, ever, ever going to change, at least in my lifetime. So fine. Where is the NHL? And I really like what I'm seeing. I like it's a creative, I think, initiative that this league has put out there. Their social media has made serious strides in really moving that needle. And you've got great people calling these games, digesting these games, handicapping these games, finally some personalities in the game. So I really have enjoyed the opening week of coverage on a national level, and absolutely to be in St. Louis and to see my favorite team, the team that I cover, get off to a great start, probably has enhanced my enjoyment a little bit as well. So we'll get a little radio perspective from Brandon Mileski today on the show. Before we get to the meat and potatoes, the main part of the show, without our partners, we don't have a podcast. So I've got to shine some light on the folks that make this happen. I'll start with my dear friend John Schweitz and Minnesota Masonic Charities. Awesome work over there. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the Minnesota Masonic Charities. When you think about the Masons, I get it. You think about the funny hats, those pancake breakfasts, which are phenomenal. My dear friend John Schweitz and I have chatted about this, and it's so much more than that. They've got the Masonic home over in Bloomington. They've got the hospital for the children over at the U of M. They are the largest fraternal organization in terms of charitable needs in our country, and they deserve a ton of recognition. So thank you, Minnesota Masonic Charities, for all you do and for supporting us over here at Talk North, and a special thanks to my good friend, John Schweitz. Of course, we wouldn't be here without the good people at Onyx Fish and Onyx Maps.
Have you ever driven past a piece of land and wondered who owns that? Or maybe you need to know exactly where a property line runs. That's where Onyx Hunt comes in. And it's not just for hunters. There are folks using Onyx for their jobs every day throughout the country. From farmers and ranchers mapping out their fields, wildland firefighters navigating rough terrain, to construction workers needing to know who owns what property, this app offers something for everyone. If you need the best land ownership maps, aerial imagery, and property boundaries in your pocket, Onyx Hunt is the tool for the job. Try it free for 7 days. Download Onyx Hunt in the app or Google Play Store, or visit onyxmaps.com/hunt to get started.
Lexus of Wayzata and Maplewood, second to none there. And a newbie here for us at Talk North, our good friends over at the StretchLab.
Hey, Mark Rosen here for StretchLab. I had my introductory first stretch when I was visiting my relatives in New Jersey. I went to the local StretchLab there for my 50-minute session. I felt so good afterwards. So when I came back, I immediately called that StretchLab in Eden Prairie. They have locations all over the Twin Cities where my nephew first signed up. I've been hooked ever since. There are locations I mentioned throughout the Twin City area, but I stuck with my Tuesday morning appointment with Jason to get my 50-minute stretch in as part of my schedule. It's like a meditation session. He stretches out my legs, my hips, my back, my neck, my traps, all of it, and I take some deep breaths, and I feel like a new man every single time I leave. My nephew's in his late 20s. I'm a little bit older, but it doesn't matter. Stretching is so important in our daily routine. Having an expert do the work is the only way to go. My advice, give StretchLab a chance to improve your overall health. Check out a location near you.
Up next, Brandon Mileski from KFAN. All right, welcome back to Wooden Sticks. As always, today we are recording from the Aquarius Home Services studio, and as promised, from the Common Man radio program on the Fan, my dear friend Brandon Mileski, 10B as we call him. Good to talk with you today.
What's up, KG? You know I always love chatting with you.
Well, and we share the passion for the Minnesota Wild and the game of hockey, so I thought this would be a great time as the season kind of gets going. You're on the Wild flagship at the Fan. You do so much over there to promote the game. In fact, if I look at all the shows that are on your station, they're all wildly successful, but you're the one guy that consistently promotes the game of hockey and pushes the Minnesota Wild, and I appreciate that about you. So let's first start with your journey. Like, you're a hockey wonk. Where did this start? How little were you when you fell in love with the game of hockey?
Well, I think like anyone, I started playing when, I was probably 5-6 years old. I don't even recall the time. Played a couple years of mites. And, my parents were not hockey parents. My dad actually loved basketball and wanted all of us to play basketball. And I come from a family of 3 boys. I'm the middle of 3. And my older brother wanted to play hockey, and I just followed an older brother's footsteps, and my younger brother followed in that footsteps. So we became a hockey family, even though there was no previous hockey experience.
I'm a little older than you, so I'll preface this by saying this might have been pre baby Tenna B when you were little. But for me, when I first started following hockey, there was a intermission cartoon on the national broadcast called Peter Puck, and for the young people out there, it's probably something you could find on YouTube. And Peter Puck would go over the nuances and rules of the game of hockey. He was a cartoon puck that would talk. And I was probably 4, 5, maybe 6 years old. And I just was like mesmerized by Peter Puck. In fact, I ended up one Christmas getting this stuffed animal that was the actual Peter Puck. And that's the little stuffed animal that went wherever I went. So anyway, was there any aspect when you were little of hockey that, like, for me, Peter Puck kind of drew you in?
When I was little, no. I always think it's humorous. Like, I barely have any memory of mites. I have two distinct memories of mites. I have one in which I went onto the ice with my skate guards on and was falling and slipping all over the place. And the second would be, I remember we were playing like a cross ice 3-on-3 type game, right? And I remember another kid fell on the puck and he was just sitting on top of the puck. And I took my stick and I started hitting him on top of the helmet. And I just remember, my parents not being too happy about that. But like, other than that, I have like zero memory of mites. I don't even really have much, maybe like a memory too of squirts. For me, I kind of, when I started getting into, 12, 13, 14 years old age is kind of when my passion for it really kind of picked up. We came from a family that was all multi-sport athletes. We'd play baseball in the summer. We'd play football in the fall. To me, it was never hockey stood out from anything of all the sports. I just love competing and I love playing sports. And I probably ended up becoming more into hockey than the others just because I probably had more success at it, to be honest with you.
Right. And was there a player? For me, it was Gilles Malash, who was the North Stars goalie back in the late 70s, early 80s. That was my kind of favorite player, the guy that I tried to emulate when I was out in the driveway playing street hockey. Was there a player for you when you first started kind of getting involved in the game that you watched and said, man, I wish I could play like that guy?
So I'm kind of in this weird spot, Gorg, where I grew up, I was born in late 1979, right? So I was here for the North Stars for the first, 11 years of my life. And like I said, I wasn't super into hockey at that point. And by the time I really got passionate and started ribbing out about hockey, the North Stars left. So there was kind of like this void, right? And I remember going into first year Bantams, and I went to a hockey camp at Michigan Tech. Up in the Upper Peninsula, right? Where you go away, you drive up there, and you're up there for a week, and you're in a hockey camp, then you come back home. And there was a New Jersey Devils player at the time named Randy McKay, and you might know him. You might know him better than me because I didn't really know of him until that moment, other than he showed us his knuckles, and they were completely deformed because he clearly was a fighter. But so from like that point forward, because we didn't have the North Stars here, I'm like, I'm just going to start cheering for the New Jersey Devils. And that was like literally right when the Devils started to hit their moment, right? Where they were making deep runs in the playoffs every year. I remember I was watching every Devils game in the Stanley Cup playoffs throughout their journey. It was must-watch TV for me. I was there I was watching when they lost the New York Rangers in Game 7 on the Stéphane Matteau, just kind of puck luck goal that knocked off of somebody and beat Martin Brodeur. So I was watching, the Jacques Lemaire era Devils before Jacques Lemaire was even a Wild head coach. And I guess for me, being a defenseman, Scott Niedermayer was one that I was kind of drawn to. I wasn't a big, strong physical guy like Scott Stevens. That wasn't my game. But watching Scott Niedermayer and the skating and the playmaking, at that time when I was growing up, like he was kind of the guy I watched. I had Martin Brodeur posters on my wall, even though I wasn't a goalie. But yes. I was watching Bill Guerin when he was playing for the New Jersey Devils. Like I was a Devils fan at that time.
Well, and truthfully, at that time, the Devils were on all the time. Like that was when ESPN had their hockey coverage. I vividly remember ESPN2 and Bill Pito with a developing situation. The light would be going off, and it was always the Devils and the Rangers, or the Devils and the Penguins, and they were a fun team to watch. Like they had a lot of personality. You mentioned Martin Brodeur, Claude Lemieux was a part of that. About that run, and Stevens and the big hits. I remember the hit he put on Eric Lindros. Yep. To this day, I've been watching hockey now for, well over 50 years. I have never seen a better hit. And listen, it was a very hard hit, and I'm sure for Eric Lindros, it's hard to watch. But that hit in the neutral zone in that playoff series, Devils Flyers, is a remarkable play in the history of hockey, and it's iconic.
Well, how about later on when he hit it was Korea in the Stanley Cup Finals? That was probably in the 2000s at that point. And that hit in today's age, Gorg. I mean, we're talking you are suspended for 15, 20 games if you deliver that kind of hit now.
Well, and the weird part about the game now is even like, let's take it down a couple notches, Teneby, and like it's a clean hit in the neutral zone and someone gets flattened, even if it's not a dirty play, now it seems like you got to deal with 3 or 4 of his teammates coming in and trying to get in your face. And I think we've gotten to a place in the game now where I don't know if we understand the nuances of physical play. And if your head's down and you get hit, I mean, no offense, you tip your hat to the guy and you should move on.
Yep. At some point, the onus on who is responsible for the hit has changed, right? Like during our 2 generations, when you were growing up, Gorg, as you just mentioned, we were taught you need to have your head up. And if you don't have your head up, you're responsible for the collision you've just received. And now it's become the opposite, where the player delivering the hit, and to a certain extent, right? Like you can't be targeting guys' heads. Like I'm all for eliminating as much head contact as possible, but we've now like excused any liability from the player who actually has the puck on their stick. And I feel like there's still a happy medium here that we should be teaching on both ends of this, as opposed to just making it one-sided.
I completely agree. So you grew up playing multiple sports, but at some point living in this state, you had to be exposed to the state high school hockey tournament for the first time. Take us back to that experience and how maybe life-changing that might have been for any young hockey player.
Well, I like I said, I didn't really find a passion for hockey until I started getting into my teenage years. So it's not like when I was 9, I was watching the state high school hockey tournament, but you knew of, like I had an older brother that was 4 years older than me. So you knew like the dream was always to get to a state tournament, right? My first initial dream was I just want to play varsity hockey. And then once that was accomplished, it's, hey, you want to get to the state tournament. You don't even care about winning the state tournament. You just want to get to the state tournament. Like that is the victory for you. And so for me, I think it was my sophomore season in high school is when the Duluth East Apple Valley game happened at the Civic Center, right, with the clear boards. And to this day, I will tell you that is the best sporting event I've ever attended in person. Because it wasn't just a 5 overtime game; it was nonstop drama.
Yes.
There were scoring chances throughout. The thing could have ended at any moment. I still remember, being up till like 1 a.m. Watching that game. And frankly, Kevin, like the atmosphere and the energy in that building was so electric that I think most of us didn't even want the game to end, right? Like most times you're cheering for that overtime goal to have a great conclusion. I think like we were having so much fun. We didn't want that thing to end. We just wanted to keep going and going and going. And to this day, like I said, it's the best sporting event I've ever attended. And obviously a very core memory for me when it comes to state high school hockey tournament, which is just, growing up, you're watching just and now it's changed so much with the hockey hair thing, but just like every single kid had a plan of, here, what am I going to say when I go out to that blue line for that opening introduction, right? Like, and to this day, even when I was coaching high school hockey, like playoff hockey was always, when you got into sections, like the butterflies and the nostalgia of the chance to make it a state high school hockey tournament was always within you. And it's a kind of a feeling you can't explain.
Yeah, I was not lucky enough to be in the building that night. I was watching on TV. It's still the best high school hockey game I have ever watched. And I felt the same way you felt being there. I literally didn't want the game to end because those were two of the most talented teams the state has ever seen. And sometimes you get a 5 overtime game or a multi-overtime game where teams are really buttoned up and not taking chances. Yep. That game was the total opposite. There were odd number rushes each overtime, back and forth. And I just remember vividly Wally Shaver and Lou Nanny on the call. And it's funny, I have a different perspective now because I've gotten to know Lou a lot better in the last 10 to 15 years. And now I realize he didn't like overtime hockey. He wanted to go to Mancini's. So I can only imagine Wally and him trying to take that in completely differently as it unfolded. But it's one of the greatest hockey games this state has ever seen. And that really says something. And I remember my coaching days, and I only coached boys high school hockey for 5 years. And I coached it in a couple of programs in Burnsville at the time I was there, and Mounds View, where we were probably going to be up against it. When I was at Burnsville, the Mike Crowley and Mark Parrish Jefferson teams were on our way. So we knew no matter what, it was going to be tough to get there. And then when I was at Mounds View, we were in the same section as Hill Murray, and they were a dominant team in the state at that time. But I'm telling you, when you coach high school hockey in this state and you gather for the first time with your young team, there's something magical about even talking about the opportunity we might have to go to the state tournament. And I think every kid that plays high school hockey has the right to have that dream. And as a coach, you kind of live vicariously through that emotion. And I'll never forget those opening meetings with your team and what that was like. And, I'm sure you had the same emotions.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat as you. As I coached at Coon Rapids, the varsity head coach for 4 years. And, all of those seasons, we're 6, 7, 8 seed in the playoffs, right? And, the odds of us getting past a Maple Grove or a Blaine at the time or a Centennial at the time was not great. Yet there's still always like that hope and belief, right? I mean, hockey's the one sport where, if you put it all together and you got chemistry and everyone's willing to work hard and sacrifice and you get good goaltending, like you can pull off upsets. And that's the beauty of it. And, I never really had grand visions during that stretch of actually getting the state tournament, but even just like winning one game to where you're playing in the semis at the Coliseum, like, how much that would mean for those kids and for that program. And you're right. I mean, you're talking about it day one and you never know how much the kids are going to improve and how much they're going to come together. And, it's just it is an unbelievable cloud that is kind of always hanging over us every single season where you always believe, hey, if everything goes right, we could do this, we could do that.
And the tournament still got the juice. Like you mentioned, the hockey hair thing has kind of changed the way we see the broadcast. And we I think, digest the tournament a little bit differently as viewers. It's multi-classes, which when I grew up, that was not the case. But I got to tell you, whether I'm there as a fan or last year lucky enough to work some of those games, when you walk in there and you see all the kids in all their school colors and you see the bands in both ends of the arena kind of going back and forth and some of the chants that happen with the student sections, there's just something that takes me back to when I was a little kid. Every time I walk into that tournament, and, I think sometimes we take it for granted because it's here and we're Minnesotans, but I got to tell you, and maybe you've had this same happenstance with some of the broadcast endeavors you've had over at the Fan, but when I talk to like national broadcasters, Eddie Olchuk and Ray Ferraro, and some of these guys that have done Olympics and Stanley Cups, they always want to ask about one thing. They want to ask about our state tournament. And I think sometimes we forget that even on a national stage, like even in the outskirts of Canada, people understand what a big deal our weekend is in March.
Well, Kevin, as you are a member of the media kind of, so yeah, I think you've been in a similar boat with me where you're working television, you've worked radio before. Sometimes as a member of the media, like just an hour before high school hockey tournament games, especially like the championship Saturday, where you're just up in the press box and the slow build of you start off with the quiet rink and the Zamboni out there, right? And all of a sudden, the patrons start coming into the building. The high school kids, they're all dressed up. The band starts playing the music. It is. I mean, it's just, there's something special to it. I can, you can obviously relate better than I can. I can't imagine playing in that environment. I just think that would be just the coolest experience ever. Unfortunately, I never got to do that. I haven't got to coach in it quite yet, but I can't imagine, being 16, 17, 18-year-olds and getting to play in that environment. And you are correct that, I hope the hockey community doesn't take it for granted. And, I think the tournament to a certain extent is almost getting better, right? I mean, like,
yes.
Class A alone, it wasn't that long ago, 15, 20 years ago, where Class A was like, all right, well, we got two teams in this thing, got a chance to win it. And then it would turn into, maybe 4 teams have a chance. And now, like, in the first round of those games, you would have a lot of 12-1 type games against teams that were just happy to be there. They have no shot. Now it seems like the Class A tournament has as much depth as we've ever seen. Some of the outstate teams are starting to improve a lot. And the double A, it seems like on any given tournament, any of the 8 teams that are in that tournament can win. So I think we're getting a little more parity and a little bit more variety than we've had in the past.
Well, and the athletes are just, they're just different now. Like they train differently. They look, I'm watching Steve Boyum last night in St. Louis, and I'm trying to remind myself when I was 19, you can relate to this. I was in Brady Hall at St. Thomas, a freshman in college, and I was a complete idiot. I had no idea, right? Like, remember, we had no idea how the world worked, and this kid is on a completely different stage, and he's ready for it. Like, you interview the kid, and you're like, my God, this guy talks like he's been in the league for 15 years and he's mature beyond his 19-year-old baby face. And it's just, it blows me away. So now let's take it to home for you. You're a dad. And I assume, and maybe I shouldn't assume, but I'm guessing your kids will find their way to hockey. How is that dynamic, and how cool is that for you as a dad?
Yeah, all three of them are in hockey right now. So I have I have 10 and 8-year-old boys, Leo and Samson. So Leo is a second-year squirt this year. Samson will be in his last year of mites, and then Ingrid is just basically starting out. She kind of did what we call our mini Mavericks program last year, which is, once a week you're just trying to learn how to skate and basically stand up. And now this year she's starting 6U. So it's a lot on my plate as someone who is I have a huge passion for coaching, and I'm co-head coaching the squirt team. I'm going to hopefully head coach Samson's mite team, and then I'm trying to help out with Ingrid's team. But this is our first year of having kind of 3 involved, and Ingrid's already bitter with me that I've missed her first 2 practices, that I haven't been out on the ice with her, and just kind of coordinating all that. But Gorg, I started off as a Bantam coach when I was like 20 years old, and coached Bantams for 6 years. Then I was an assistant at the varsity level for 4 years. Then I was a head coach at the varsity level for 4 years. And then once my kids came along, I'm like, I don't have the capacity to do this anymore. So I left coaching for a couple of years until my kids got back into it. And it's very interesting coaching from the levels of Bantams and high school, and then now jumping into mite level coaching for the first time, right? We're coaching mite 1, and it has, it's really actually kind of evolved my coaching. I feel like I'm immensely a better coach than I was back when I was coaching Bantams in high school. You just see it from a different perspective. You're teaching different things. Obviously, the game has changed a lot. How we receive information, right? Like you have so much more easier access to drills and teaching techniques than we did just with the internet and social media. So there's immensely more information out there now on how to coach and how to teach certain things. But it also is, getting back to mites has changed my perspective of what's really important when it comes to coaching, right? Is, teaching the correct forecheck and the power play is not nearly as important as connecting with these kids and making sure they're good teammates and they're having a fun season.
Yeah, I will tell you, having done hockey schools like a lot of us did over the years, coaching high school was a breeze compared to trying to get mites to focus and to have a good like to get everybody on the same page. Like their minds are going 18 different directions at that age, and hockey can be a little complicated even at that level, and trying, different level of skill, and oh my goodness. But I will tell you, the love that they have for their coaches, like kids that age that I dealt with back when I was doing hockey schools, were the most loving kids, and they made you feel so good about what you were doing. So I'm sure for you as a dad, having that layer of emotion involved, it's got to be very gratifying.
There's no doubt. Like the kids at that age, when they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, like they all have an appreciation for the coach. They let you know what they think of you. They're saying hi to you when you see them. Whereas by the time you get to Bantams in high school, some of them might, but they're kind of out in their own world. And and coaching the kids, I mean, to be able to spend the time with your children out on the ice. And also, like, you're showing them an example of what you want them to be, right? Like they're, even without even having to specifically teach or coach them, they're learning, hey, my dad is basically, without teaching me, is teaching me how to be a leader right now and how to work hard, and is showing up, carrying the bucket of pucks every single day and setting up cones. And, when the hour's over, he's out there getting the nets set up on the boards when the Zamboni's out there, right? Like there's a lot of work that comes along with being a coach, and you're showing them leadership skills, and you're showing them, to a certain extent, public speaking and having to talk in front of an entire room and how to handle adversity. So just from a life lessons point, not only just spending time with my kids, but I'm also, without even directly teaching them life lessons, they are just learning it through watching me.
And for our listeners, and I think most of the folks that follow us here on Wooden Sticks know that KFAN, the fan as we call it, is a fixture. And we have a lot of folks that we reference or have on the show from your station. But every day from noon until 3 o'clock, it's you and Dan Cole, the common man. And I, the Common Man is an interesting personality. He's self-proclaimed the best boot hockey goalie in the history of Minnesota hockey, so that's kind of fun. But truthfully, I think he doesn't follow hockey the way a lot of people that, like you and I, that are kind of really tapped into it, follow the game. But it's got to be fun, I think, for you, because as I listen to you guys on the show, he kind of lets you take over at that part of the program, as you call it, and it's a good meshing of, because the Common Man can do just about anything, but it's got more of a comedic feel. And if we want actual hockey contact, the good stuff, the meat and potatoes, we have to come to you. That's got to make you feel pretty good.
Yeah, it's we've been together 20 years now. So
wow.
The first X amount of years, and I was still young and in radio and didn't really know what I was doing, and you're combining that with trying to form chemistry with your host, and it takes a while to develop that, right? Like, I know you on FanDuel Sports Network. I'm sure you and Anthony LaPanta, and whether it's Ryan Carter or Wes Walls or Lou Nan, who's ever in there, you guys have been working together so often now that you guys know how to play off of each other. And I think that's kind of what happened with Common and I. And as we've gone along, I feel like he's gained more confidence in me to be able to have the reins a little bit more, right? Like, Common's always just been a guy who he's by himself and he's working by himself and he doesn't do a lot of guests. And so it's kind of taken a while for him to trust me. And part of that was me. I had to prove myself and gain some equity as well. But, it's always interesting when he brings up Wild, because I'll be honest, KG, I don't think he cares what I say about it. I think he's, mostly doing it, to kill some time. And if there are people out there that want to hear about Wild hockey, he's placating to the audience a little bit. But everything I'm telling to him, I don't think he completely cares and is taking in all the information I'm giving him. It's just, here's 5 minutes, go talk about this for a while.
So for young aspiring broadcasters, and we've had a few that have contacted me on X or Twitter, and they listen and they like to have certain guests on, and you do something that I think a lot of young people would look at and say, man, that's freaking awesome. Noon to 3 every day on the radio, on a sports station. But I can tell you from filling
on podcast with Kevin Gorg.
I don't think that's near the top. Sure, we'll go with it today. But honestly, I've filled in many times, and I try to tell people, like, listen, we're all sitting in the car, think we could do this. I'm telling you, 3 hours is an unbelievably long time to do one show, and to do that 5 days in a row. There is an art to that I can't even freaking put into words. So, and I know it's kind of the running joke, right? There's no prep, and I know it's totally BS, but how do you carry 3 hours legitimately every single day? I don't understand how you do it.
Well, it's interesting you phrase it like that, because the way I would do a show, right? Like, when Common's out, I have to fill in for him. And
Lieutenant Fitzgerald.
The way I do a show is completely different than how he would do a show, because I cannot do a show like him. And frankly, I think 99.9% of people on radio throughout the country can't do the show the way he does it. And so he has a gift. He has a special talent that just nobody can duplicate. And he talks about being a radio gardener, and he literally is. I mean, he'll come back from a commercial break and not have anything planned what he's going to talk about, and not know what he's going to talk about.
Oh, dear God.
And I am the complete opposite. Like, I need everything. Here's the blueprint for the show. Here's what we're going to talk about this segment. Here's the structure and how I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to have guests at this point. I would completely flounder and flop, and I probably already do, even the way I do it. But if I had to do a show the way he would do it, I would mightily struggle. So it is interesting that him and I would approach radio completely different ways, yet here we are on a show together. And, I'm not lying to you, KG. Most times before a show, him and I are not talking about what we're going to talk about on the air. It is like, there are times, right, where here's a story that I think he would like and he would get a kick out of, or I'll text him the story or a certain talking point. But for the most part, we're not having conversations of, here's what we're going to talk about it. Here's when we're going to talk about it. It is mostly improvisational. And I've, at least because I have been with him for 20 years, I've got a pretty good feel of where he's going to go most times. But even if someone fills in for me that's not as comfortable with him and doesn't have the chemistry like that, it's going to be more challenging for them to know where he's going half the time. And even to this day, I don't know where he's going all the time. And he just he has a brain that works unlike anyone else.
Yeah, he's a talented guy, and you guys play off each other so well every day on The Fan from noon to 3. So let's get to it here in the final.
And you love when he gives you fluff, don't you?
Well, listen, I've given him so much damn material that I feel like I should be getting residual checks in the mail with the hundreds and all.
Hundreds?
It's funny, Tennessee, I got to tell you, I'm an avid listener, and I'm in my car a ton, going wherever I'm. Summer at Canterbury, wintertime going to the Grand Casino Reno now, or track and wild practice like I will later today when we have a noon skate. But anyway, it's on all the time. And it's funny how many times I get caught where I'm just kind of zoning out, and all of a sudden you guys will have a little barb in there, and you won't even say my name, but it's something that I said, some idiotic phrase or something, and it just makes me smile. I do. I get a big kick out of it, and I think I'm intrigued by the Common Man, because I've been in there, and Program Password, which you guys do every Friday, is my favorite part of your show, and stand-up comedy is something I love to attend, and I was young, I've always migrated to those type, but I am in awe of the talent that it takes, and he has that way about him, and I think, to your point, that allows him to do what 99.9% of radio hosts can't do, which is do a show about nothing that's actually something, and it's awfully fun.
But it's funny you mentioned stand-up comedy, because even stand-up comedy, right? I would have to imagine 99.9% of stand-up comedians know exactly what they're going to say when they're going to say it. Their entire routine, they've probably rehearsed it countless times and know how to deliver each punchline. And I feel like Common, he has jokes, right? But it's not like he structures them out all the time, where I'm going to tell this joke, then this joke, and then this joke. He'll kind of weave in and out, and whatever just comes up to his mind at that time. It's just, it is bizarre, and I don't know how his brain works like that.
It's pretty cool. All right, let's get to it. We're recording this on a Friday. Our listeners are probably getting to this as the weekend is unfolding, maybe early the next week. But we just had a chance to watch the first game of the season, number 1 of 82. So we're not going to get over our skis here, but just your initial thoughts of the Wild and the Blues opening night.
Well, I mean, hard to be discouraged by a 5-0 win. And there's really not a lot of negative things to say. But just from a pure positivity standpoint, I mean, clearly Gustafsson was great last night. He signed the big contract, and he looked as composed and just position-wise, always in the right spot. He wasn't having to make, he's a completely different goalie than Marc-Andre Fleury. He's not having to make dramatic post to post, stack the pad type plays, poke check. He was square to every shot last night. And I don't know about UKG, but whenever a goalie, when the shot is sent to them and they're able to just smother it in their equipment every single time and get the whistle, to me, that's always a sign of a confident goalie that's just not letting things pucks bounce off him. And I thought, I didn't see one weakness in his game last night. And then on top of that, I mean, obviously, Kaprizov, Boldy, Rossi, that line looked great. Kaprizov, 3 assists. Boldy with the goal and 2 assists. And what I found a little fascinating with that line last night is kind of 2 of their goals were set up from shots from where the blue line meets the boards, right? I mean, the power play goal from Eriksson Ek where he tapped it in, that was Boldy right off a face-off play. Kind of not the greatest of angle, but he recognized that they kind of had a 2-on-1 in front, threw it. Kaprizov redirects it, hits the post, and then Eriksson Ek just cleans it up with an easy goal. And then the Rossi goal on the rebound, that was just Kaprizov throwing it on net from high in the zone near the blue line. So I don't know if that's a talking point that has been brought up to them. Obviously, Kaprizov, and when he's had to play with Zuccarello in the past, sometimes they can overpass and overhandle the puck sometimes. So I don't know if that was a one-time small sample size, but I'm encouraged by, hey, maybe they'll have a little bit more of a shoot-first mentality. And then you combine that with, Ryan Hartman was fantastic in the postseason last year. And after, maybe 2-3 months prior, there were fans and maybe even management that wanted him out of town.
Right.
And to see the postseason he was so good in the playoffs last year that he moved Marco Rossi down in the lineup, and only one game, but it's nice to see that carry over. And there's nothing I love more basically with the Wild than watching Hartman versus Binnington at this stage. I love that little rivalry, and Hartman's been getting the best of him lately. So that was encouraging that you got, 2 goals from your bottom 6. I thought Trenyon, we've heard about him dropping some weight and getting a little faster, and I thought that was noticeable last night. There was one rush he had, probably his first shift of the game. I think it was like 5 minutes into the first period, where he had a little speed on the rush. I'm like, I did not see that out of Trenyon last year. And he just seemed to be getting to pucks a little bit quicker in the offensive zone. So, they had a couple turnovers early in that first period that weren't too good, but I thought overall that was a pretty good, clean effort by the team.
Yeah, I think if you had a checklist before last night's game of what you were hoping to see, you start with the goaltending and you work your way out. I thought they hit a lot of the boxes and checked them off nicely. I'll say this, the Brodin thing looks like he could return as soon as this weekend or early next week. So I'm going to take that off the conversation for now. I do think that the Zuccarello loss and the Sturm loss in the first 2 months here is going to be something that this team has to be ready or prepared to deal with, because for Nico Sturm, he's great in the faceoff circle and he's really good on the penalty kill. And then for Zuccarello, he's a top 6 guy, which makes the lineup that much deeper, and he's such a key asset on the power play. So I know things went well last night in game 1, but I've looked at the October schedule, and these are, in my eyes, tend to be 2 pretty important vacancies. So my hope is they can kind of weather the storm, because I don't think people realize how valuable those 2 commodities are.
Well, to your point, right? Especially Zuccarello, it changes your entire forward lineup. And last night they got away with it. They scored 5 goals, and they were able to get some goals from some depth players. But ideally, Marcus Foligno's not on your second line, right? I like Marcus Foligno in the role that he plays, but I don't necessarily want him on a scoring line. And that
Agreed.
moves, even though that third line scored twice last night of Hartman, Johansson, and Trenyon, long term, I don't know if that is a line that's going to be putting the puck in the net a whole lot. And then you're now leaning on young guys on your fourth line. I think they were fine last night, with Hunter Haight and Ogren. But long term, in basically year 1 for some of these guys, don't know if that's going to be successful moving forward. And to your point with Brodin, right? If there was a part that I wasn't too excited about last night, and he's still a young player, so he still has lots of room to grow, and I'm definitely not giving up on him. But I thought David Jiricek struggled a little bit. He had a really bad turnover in the defensive zone. He had a bad penalty. I do think he struggles a little bit in the defensive zone, and especially kind of like your first breakout pass is not his strength. So he needs games and he needs experience. I did think Bouillon looked all right. I thought Bouillon looked different last night than what I'd seen from him in the postseason, and that's expected, right? He had just jumped up from college hockey, and you're immediately thrown into playoff hockey, which is a different beast than regular season. To me, last night he looked a little bit more confident and had a little bit more space to work with, and I do think he's, out of all the rookies, he's going to be the best player this year. But your defensive depth takes a hit without Brodin in the lineup, and even without Zuccarello and Sturm, right? I think you can get away with it for small doses, but if you have another injury up front, now you're really hurting, right? And we saw last year when Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek were out as long as they were, like, we can't afford injuries to Eriksson Ek, we can't afford injuries to Kaprizov, and we really can't afford injuries to Boldy when it comes to, as long as those 3 are in, I think you can get away with some injuries elsewhere for small doses. But now if you get injuries in when you're top 6, when you already have Zuccarello out and you already have Sturm out, now you're in trouble.
And I think the one difference this year, if the injuries pile up a little bit, which it seems like they do every year everywhere, but Bill Guerin has a little wiggle room now. I think to start the year, it's $4.5 roughly $1 million in cap space. And if he wants to be creative and make a trade that you can maybe bring something in, you'll have to lose something you've got on the roster now, and maybe some equity in terms of young talent or a draft pick, but he finally has the flexibility to make that move. I thought the biggest problem the last couple years was they were missing 3, 4, and sometimes 5 or 6 key players, and there was nothing they could do other than call guys up from Iowa. This year feels different in that regard.
You're 100% correct, right? If I'm selling hope as to how the Minnesota Wild can make an extended run in the playoffs and be a Stanley Cup contender, to me, the point you just made is the biggest difference where they have a higher ceiling now. Because they have cap space, the last couple of years when they've had a team that's going to the playoffs, they got to trade deadline time. They barely can make any moves, right? They're settling for the Johanssons and the Gustav Nyquists and the defenseman the offensive defenseman whose name is escaping me at this time, who was playing for Dallas at one point. But they weren't able to go big fish fishing any of those seasons. And now you are going to have cap space, whereas if this team can show, hey, we're a top 4, top 5 team in the West by the time you get to February, now you're going to have room to, I've thrown out the name, and you don't know how these other teams are going to do by the time we get there. But let's say the Buffalo Sabres continue to struggle. Go out and try to get a Tage Thompson.
Yes.
And, add him to your top 6 as a center, big guy, right-hand shot who can score some goals. And all of a sudden, this team changes dramatically if you can get a player of that ilk before, who knows what happens with the Rangers. Maybe you're able to get Panarin on a rental and combine him with his buddy and Kaprizov, right? Like those types of players we have never been in the market for. And now this team has to produce on the ice first to put them in a position where you want to be buyers as opposed to sellers. You want to be buyers as opposed to staying pat. But that is the biggest difference of how can this team become a team that gets out of the first round of the playoffs. And to me, that is the vision I have in my head.
Yeah, I think it's going to be super interesting to see as we get a little closer to the midpoint of the season, and watch how this team positions itself, what Bill Guerin wants to do, because it feels to me, just being around these guys on a regular basis, that they see this window of opportunity has opened, and they've got Kirill Kaprizov in his prime. They've got Matt Boldy ascending to what could be superstar status in this league. They've got Marco Rossi, who continues to grow. They've got the young defensemen, as we've talked about, Faber and now Zeev Boyum. It just feels to me, Brandon, like Billy Guerin and his staff are not going to play around. Like they are going to go all in at some point. I don't know if it's right away this year, but in the next 2, it just feels like they realize this is our shot. And I love it. Like I'm here for it. Like as a Minnesota hockey fan, as a Wild fan, it just feels like this next 3, 4, 5 years is the best window they've had in a long time.
100%. And that's why, this summer, I think everyone expecting, Christmas Day on July 1st. But those players weren't available. And I actually am happy with the way management and ownership handled that hey, even though we finally have money, we don't need to go force it here. And let's save it for another day for when those players become available, because we haven't been in those positions before. And I agree with you. All their best players are in their prime. I agree that I think Boldy's going to be a superstar in this league. And you also, on the back end, Spurgeon and Brodin can still play now, but 4 or 5 years down the road, their windows are going to be shutting. So we kind of have a 2-3 year window here where I do think they are absolutely going to go for it. And maybe this year won't be the year, just because part of this plan is all of these young guys producing. And it's hard to believe that Buyum and Juracek and Ogren and Yurov and maybe even Hunter Haight, that they're all going to be, big time NHL producers here in year one. But 2-3 years down the road, when you still have these guys in their prime, and those guys have now reached that point where they've developed, and you're able to maybe go out and externally and bring somebody else in. To me, this still might be a transition year, but next year, 2 years from now, to me, that is a big time window for this team to make a run.
All right, so I'm going to final part of the show here. We're going to do 2 Stanley Cups. We're going to start with, okay, you're in the sports book and you're spotting up, and nowadays you can actually bet on the matchup. So if you believe these 2 teams are both going to be in the cup, you can get like astronomical odds. I'm talking hundreds? Yes, hundreds to 1 on the bet. And then my second cup will be, if everything falls into place and the window that is open works out and the Wild end up making a run. Your Stanley Cup on the second side will be, okay, who do you want the Wild to face when they finally get to their very first Stanley Cup? So I'll let you go first with, all right, you're just in a sports book, you're spotting up, and you truly believe these two teams are going to end up winning the East and West. Who would it be?
Man, it's the most unpredictable sport in the world, right?
It is.
What's great about the NHL is so much parity. And that once you get to the playoffs, like literally any of the 16 teams on any given year can make a run. If I'm in a sports bet, I'm in a sports book. I'm a big value bet guy. I try to find deep shots. I don't know if there's a lot of teams though this year that I would be willing to take a deep shot on. Last year I think my deep shot was Ottawa, and I think they snuck in. But if I'm going to go chalky, it's probably boring and cliche because I probably pick this team almost every year, but it's hard to not like the Colorado Avalanche as long as Cale Makar and Nathan McKinnon are in their primes. And, now they got Landeskog back. I don't know exactly what we're going to get out of him this year, but that can add, Brock Nelson re-signed there in free agency. So I feel like Colorado, clearly their top end guys are as good as anyone's, but they've added a little bit more depth that maybe they haven't had in the past. And we'll see from an injury standpoint if they can hold on. So if you want me to go chalky, I'd probably go Colorado. If I'm going to go off the board, I hate to say it because this is going to sound very homerish, but the Wild at 40-1, because they are, I can see Bill Guerin making a big swing at the trade deadline to maybe reinforce some things here. I don't think the Wild at 40-1 are a bad bet. I know it seems like the fashionable pick right now, if you want to take someone off the board, is the Utah Mammoth at 50-1. And by the way, their jerseys and their logo and their color scheme, they absolutely knocked it out of the park. That looks sweet. But they are definitely a team on the rise. But I feel like in the NHL, teams don't just go from like non-playoff team to winning Stanley Cups. There's always a progression, it seems. It seems like you got to make the playoffs, and then you got to learn how to play in the playoffs. You got to learn how to play in the first round for a year or two, and then you might make that step up to the second round or maybe get to a conference final, right? I mean, how long have we seen Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers having to try to make this progression of getting to where they need to get to? And there is a knowledge of knowing how to win in the playoffs is very important. So it's hard for me to completely buy in at the Mammoth at this moment. I feel like I'm skirting it around here a little bit for you, but I guess I'd go Colorado Avalanche in the West. East, man, I don't know if I really like anyone too much in the East.
Well, don't sleep on your Devils. They were banged up, weren't they?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, you're right.
I thought last year they dealt with a lot of injuries.
That's who I liked before last year as well. I literally put money on them to win the Stanley Cup last year, and that did not fare well for me.
Well, that's a team I would look at. I think they're 15-16-1, but if you would pair them up, in a parlay with the Avalanche or the Wild and do a couple of Stanley Cups, you could get some unbelievable odds. The Wild thing isn't that far-fetched if you look back at what they did against Vegas in that series last year. And if I had to pick a dream scenario, and I'm probably going to get ripped by I got a bunch of high school buddies that give me a lot of grief for my man crush on Sidney Crosby. But if we could get one more run, as the career is coming into an end for Crosby and the Penguins, I know it's very, very, very unlikely. But my dream scenario would be Penguins and Wild. And I've always looked at St. Paul and looked at that area when the weather's warm, and we'll see some of that opening weekend here. But Teneby, can't you just see, like, even your show, the radio broadcasts in town, like if this team makes a cup run, I've lived through a couple with the North Stars, and I know you're a lot younger than me, but I think you understand this town and how it would be absolutely bananas. And so I know in my heart of hearts it's going to happen. I just hope it happens while I'm still working over there. So I've got it in my mind, Wild and Penguins, and I'm going to stick with it.
Well, Penguins, maybe Marc-Andre Fleury is their goalie out of retirement at that point, making that run. I do recall the North Stars run to the Stanley Cup finals when they played Pittsburgh in, was that 91, 92, whenever that was, and went to a game, and that atmosphere was absolutely electric. Enjoyed that entire run by the North Stars. You know, the Wild, I thought you brought up an interesting point that I feel like Wild fans hate to hear this because it's been so long of them just being one and done in the playoffs, and they don't want to hear the excuses anymore. I do think last year's series against Vegas was different. And even though they didn't win, even though they didn't advance, to me, it looked like a team that was learning to play the right way in the postseason and had a little bit different resiliency to them and was playing the proper style and could have easily won that series and advanced. And I do think that is going to be a good carryover for them going into this season if they were to make the playoffs again. Because I think previous playoff series, you're like, man, we're just not on the same level as the team we're playing. And I think last year was different. And, you know, Vegas is a team with a lot of playoff experience and knows how to play in those situations. And the Wild were toe-to-toe with them. So I do think there was a change last year, even though we didn't see it in terms of advancing.
Awesome insight as always. I went longer than I wanted to as far as my time management goes, but that was just because the conversation was outstanding. Teneby, thank you for taking the time. We're going to listen to you weekdays, noon to 3 on the Fan, and always enjoy that. But most importantly, even with your coaching schedule, I hope I get to see you once in a while at the rink.
Yeah, it's a lot harder for me to get there than I once did just because of all the kids are involved in hockey. But I will still got to make it over there and see you. And of course, we'll have you back on and play Program Password.
Of course, that'll be great fun for me to once again make a complete ass of myself. It'll be awesome. He's the great Brandon Mileski from the Fan. This is Wooden Sticks, and I'm back after a short break to put a bow on this week's show. All right, great to hear the thoughts of Teneby. Brandon Mileski here from KFAN. Interesting, I think, takes on the younger players on this roster, and I agree with a lot of what he had to say. I have a lot of confidence that Zeev Boyum is going to become a star player in this league, and I'm not at a level, whether it was coaching, scouting, seeing the game, but I tap into enough people that are, and not just people involved in this team, but more on the national side. I've got some dear friends that are scouts for other teams. I've got enough people that I know and trust in the game on the coaching side, the management side that I bump into, and then talking to his teammates. Like, you know, Zeev Boyum to me he's taken a step, and I think he's going to take a bigger step as this season progresses. I really like what I saw in training camp from him. And I know Brandon made a good point on Jiricek having a couple of tough situations in that opening game on Thursday in St. Louis, but I've really liked what I've seen from him throughout camp. Assertive, aggressive, physical, still evolving in the defensive zone. Still, I think, some habits that have to be broken or curtailed, but at his size, with the way he moves and the way he can shoot the puck, there's something there. I am convinced there's something there, and he's 21 years old. I think there's still a ton of room for growth back there. I liked Liam Ogren's game last night. I've liked Hunter Haight throughout training camp into the preseason, and specifically in his first NHL regular season game last night. I think this kid's got some juice to his game. The fact that he scored 20 last year on a depleted Iowa Wild team in his first season of pro hockey at that level, super impressed with Hunter's game. And then, I mean, if this team's going to make a run, if we're sitting here in the early stages of the season and saying what has to fall into place for the Wild to be a legitimate cup contender, get past that first round, which every fan always says, you got to get past the first round. And I agree, you do. Well, it starts with goaltending. Like, you look at any team and look at the Florida Panthers and what they've established these last 3 years going to the cup. It starts in net with Bob. Bobrovsky is widely considered to be one of the 2 or 3 best at his position in the world. And so Gustafsson is on this track, and he looks like a guy that continues to get better. Is it Marc-Andre Fleury? Is it his training habits? Is it just the experience that he's gone through? He's clearly a different player now at that position than he was when he first got to Minnesota. And if you've looked at the evolution of his game, it clearly continues to get better. So I start there. And I think any cup contending team has to have star power. I've yet to see a team win a Stanley Cup and not say, okay, it makes sense. I mean, this makes sense to me that guy, like, okay, Crosby, Taves and Kane, Kopitar, Kopitar, certain players have that star power where that makes sense. Well, I look at Boldy and Kaprizov in that light. These are the type of players that the Stanley Cup seems to find. And so the Wild have that. And then you have to have depth of talent. I look at Ek. I look at Ryan Hartman down the middle of the rink and the way they've established themselves, especially Ek in this league, is the type of players that can make a difference. So they're young. They've got some veteran leadership. They've got goaltending. There's a lot that I like right now about this hockey team. The problem is, if we're going to be honest, is the Western Conference to me is far tougher and far deeper than the East. If you put the Wild in the East, they'd be one of the 2 or 3 betting favorites. That's the bottom line. They're one of 6 or 8 as I handicap it, maybe 9 if you count St. Louis. Like, this is completely deeper waters in the Western Conference. So we can get excited early on, and rightfully so, and I think that this team's going to be damn good. But, man, I look at the Western Conference, and, the big dogs are always going to be a majority of the Cup favorites. Take out Florida, who's got some injuries right now. Toronto always seems to be a betting and media darling. But in the West, I mean, you talk about big-time teams, Dallas, Colorado, Vegas, L.A., I mean, it just goes Winnipeg, Minnesota, St. Louis. Like, these are really good hockey teams. So it's going to be tough. And I guess if you're going to win a Stanley Cup, it's supposed to be tough. But it's nice to have a team that's relevant. It's nice to have a team with some young players that you can, as a fan, latch onto and say, I want to see where this where does this go with Zeev Boyum? Where does this go with David Jiricek? What can Liam Ogren be in this league? That's the fun part. And we've watched this happen already with players like Matt Boldy, where you saw that potential. You saw that there was something there, and now you've watched this player evolve into now. I mean, we saw the 4 Nations. We saw him on Team USA. This guy is an evolving superstar in this league, and we've got a couple at the top of this roster. And I haven't mentioned Marco Rossi's name, who continues to be one of those guys that's just kind of slowly getting better. Year by year, you're seeing him get a little bit better and a little bit stronger. So, yeah, it's all good right now in the world of the Minnesota Wild, and we'll hope that continues as they migrate through a very, very challenging schedule here in October, and do so without the likes of Matt Zuccarello and Nico Sturm, who, as we talked about with Teneby on the show today, are going to be key cogs to try to fill that void while they're out till likely, early December as we look at this. And the good news is Jonas Brodin likely returns soon. Maybe by the time you're listening to this show, the second week of the season, he's back. So I know he's very close. He's looked good in practice. He skated with the team in St. Louis at morning skate, which is always a tell for me that he might return in the next couple of games. And that would be great for the Wild to have number 25 back on the ice as they get into the busy part of this month. And there's back-to-backs. There's a lot of travel. And for all of us as hockey fans, it's just going to be a lot of fun. College hockey's going, NHL's going, and high school hockey's right around the corner. So to dive in to all of that conversation right here on Wooden Sticks. We're back with another show next week. You can ping me on X or Twitter at Gorgomatic21. Any recommendation you've got, coaches, players, managers, people that have promoted the game of hockey, we'd love to have them on, and I'd love your opinion at Gorgomatic21. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll chat with you next week.